The City of Annapolis primary election is Tuesday, September 16th. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., and if you are in line by 8, you will still be able to vote. There is no Republican primary this year, as all Republican candidates are unopposed and will advance to the November general election. On the Democratic side, there are contested races for mayor and in wards 1, 3, 4, and 6. If you received a mail-in ballot, it must be received, not just postmarked by 4:30 p.m. on September 12th. Ballots can be mailed, dropped in an official drop box, delivered to City Hall, or taken to your polling place on Election Day. Ion Annapolis offered every candidate in the challenge race the opportunity to speak with us. We reached out to each campaign 3 times. Each candidate was asked these same questions, and their answers are presented here, unedited and in their own words. No one received the questions in advance, and in fairness, all of these conversations are being released at the same time. We do plan to do something similar for the general election once the ballot is set. Please have a listen to each of these candidates so you can make an informed vote. Well, joining us very early after a holiday weekend this morning, we have Alderman Harry Huntley, who is the incumbent running for Ward 1 council seat. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, John. Feeling phenomenal and enjoying my Labor Day weekend and ready to hit the ground for the next couple weeks.
Well, I'll tell you, we do have a primary election for those that are unaware coming up on Tuesday, the 16th. And I will encourage everybody to get out and vote because that's what we do. We get a chance to pick our representatives in local, county, state, and federal government. And when we have the opportunity to do that. And we want to talk with Alderman Huntley to find out some of his thoughts as we lead into the election. So you want to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. I guess the big elephant in the room, or maybe it's the elephant on the dock, city dock resiliency and flooding. We're moving forward with a major city dock resiliency project to protect downtown from frequent flooding, sea level rise. Do you support the current city dock plan? And how would you ensure that it's success if you're reelected?
Yeah, I support getting city dock done. What we've seen time and time again is that these plans have gotten brought forward. They've gotten to various stages of completion. And then somebody says, well, I just have this one problem. Well, just this one thing over here. And then they get picked apart to death and nothing happens and our businesses flood more and more and more. And I worry with this election that that's exactly what's going to happen. We have candidates running who say, sure, I support the flood protection, but I don't support this, I don't support that, I don't support the other thing. And what's going to happen there is, say, start making all of these changes, you end up delaying, you have to go back, you get this approval, you have to get a different approval. And not only does that slow down the momentum we have to actually stop the flooding and to address what is a genuinely urgent problem, it also means we lose more money. Every time, and the longer you wait, the more expensive things get. And so the money you have goes less far. But also, a lot of these sources of funding have expiration dates on them. And so I think we've absolutely got to get city dock done. I have the background of working on getting environmentally positive projects done more efficiently, more effectively. And so bringing that expertise to something like, for the long time, what was holding up the city was the environmental review. I tell you what, John, later today, I'm going to be doing environmental reviews for some agricultural projects that I'm working on in my day job. Like, I know how these things work. It's not exactly the same, but I have a much better understanding of the technical aspects of this, I think, than anybody else running for this seat. And so I'm really excited to work on getting it done, to work on pushing this forward, and to recognize that you're always going to have to keep adapting. If our financing changes, there's going to be more concrete and less granite. That's the kind of thing we can work on. But my priorities are unpaving paradise and preserving it for posterity. I think I've got the energy and the expertise to actually make that happen.
Sounds like a Joni Mitchell lyric to me.
It is. Yeah. I did kind of pull it from that, right?
There you go. Let's switch over to crime and public safety here. Several neighborhoods are facing public safety challenges. And I know when I looked in the 2024 statistics, actually Ward 7, strangely enough, seemed to be one of the most violent wards in the city. They had a homicide, 2 rapes, and multiple robberies.
City officials have noted all sorts of common issues like thefts from unlocked vehicles citywide and discussed solutions with better street lighting, community policing to deter crime. What do you think we need to do to improve public safety here in Annapolis?
Sure. Well, the thing you're going to hear from probably everybody is we've got to address the root causes of crime, right? And I am all over that. We want to create good jobs. We want to reduce poverty. I think that kind of goes without saying. But let's get more into the nitty gritty. This is not something where we have to reinvent the wheel. We know what works. We can look at other examples. I mean, just up the road, look at how Baltimore has seen a dramatic decrease in homicides and in all sorts of crime, right? Carjacking is significantly down there too. I think one of the clear examples that you saw in Baltimore, the mayor has really emphasized, has been engaging youth. If you can get kids out to midnight basketball instead of hanging out on the street, that really does make a big difference. And so one of the things that I was proud to work with Alderman O'Neill on in this past budget was getting sustained funding for some after school programs, for some summer programs, for some teen programs. These were all pretty much around the Clay Street community, not exclusively, I should say. There was one that was more citywide. And originally, she had brought those forward as using one-time money, and then we were able to find a way to make it so that was recurring funding and get those programs continuing so that kids who are vulnerable have a place to go and a place to feel like they have a sense of community. Because that's the other part of it, is having strong communities. Again, I'm most familiar that it's not a whole heck of a lot of violent crime in Ward 1, but we do sit right next to where we have significant crime in the Clay Street community. So that's where I am most familiar with. And one of the things we hear a lot from folks in that old Fourth Ward area is everybody used to watch everybody, right? We used to have this very vibrant, dynamic community where you couldn't get away with anything because so-and-so mama was sitting out on the step and she would tell your mama. So I think it's also really about community design. If we have communities where we have mixed use and mixed income, we're a lot less likely to see the kinds of crime that you're talking about. Because really, of course, when you concentrate poverty, you end up with worse outcomes. My grandfather grew up in subsidized housing projects in Baltimore, and some of the horror stories that he can talk about, it just is so obvious that concentrating poverty doesn't make sense. So another solution is that all of our public housing communities should be mixed use and mixed income. But the fact of the matter is that you can do all of those things for prevention, and people are still going to commit crimes. People are still going to rob cars or steal sunglasses or even bring out the guns. But what we need to ensure, what our police are working really hard to do and what we have more work to do on, is that if you commit a crime in Annapolis, you need to be absolutely certain that you are going to get caught. Our homicide clearance rate is more than 25% higher than the national average. And I think our police department deserves a lot of credit for that. They've taken some innovative strategies under Chief Jackson to make sure that they close out cold cases, that they take more evidence right at the scene. But we can do more to increase that likelihood of getting caught, because evidence shows us that is much more of a deterrent than throwing people in jail for longer. So I think we can use new technologies like we just funded this year a drone program, which is not to say we're going to have drones circling the city all the time, but the idea is that when there is a report of, say, shots fired, the drone can get there in a minute and a half, whereas a police car might take 4 minutes to drive there. And so you get more evidence faster, which should be all the difference in solving a crime. So if I was going to talk about a few different things, Johnny, it is that addressing those root causes and making sure that people have a sense of community and making sure that when there are crimes, it's people get caught. And then if I can just say one last part on this, because I mentioned earlier in Ward 1, we don't have a ton of the super violent crime that I think you're talking about in other parts of the city. But we do have real quality of life crimes that impact residents. So I proposed bringing back the downtown ambassadors. These are sort of like a police auxiliary. They, when they were funded before under a grant from the state, all the guys who were hired, and maybe some women, were former bouncers. And so they were people who are really good at de-escalating. They could work with somebody who's panhandling and go and buy them a hot dog. They had a budget for buying hot dogs at Pips. It was the kind of, we hear about community policing. This is almost like one step away from that, right? It's truly putting the community in that community policing and then de-emphasizing even the policing a little bit. But it made our streets feel safer because we didn't have to worry about somebody haranguing you for a couple bucks. And we had them out when people were getting out of the bars and maybe they've been drinking a little too much. So I really tried hard to get that put back into the city budget this year. And I'd like to take another crack at that next year.
A lot of things that you mentioned in there was talking about poverty and everything else, but housing affordability is also an issue here in Annapolis. There are growing concern for many in Annapolis. In fact, there was a recent survey where it said that it's the number one concern above taxes and crime statewide. And that same survey found that 42% of young renters are considering leaving Maryland due to the high cost of housing. What are your thoughts to make Annapolis more affordable for more people?
Let me just give you one more stat on that because it blows my mind. In the past 15 years, from 2010 to 2025, the average age of first-time homebuyer has gone from 30 to 40. Sorry, median age of first-time homebuyer has gone from 30 to 40 in just the last 15 years. That's really mind-blowing. It shows us very clearly that for a lot of people, home ownership is out of reach. And even that they're having to delay it, right? They might not be able to start a family because they can't buy a home. So my vision is that we have a Annapolis that all sorts of kinds of people at all different stages of life can afford. And what that requires is a diversity of housing types. It means, yeah, absolutely, we should have some big old single family houses in Murray Hill, right? Acton Hall, huge. We should of course have those. We should also allow Annapolis to have the kind of, we should allow all of Annapolis to have the kind of diversity of housing types that Ward 1 has. We've got single family houses, we've got row houses, we've got duplexes, we've got apartment buildings. We should make that legal for the rest of Annapolis because we know not only does it lead to better housing affordability, it leads to a more fiscally responsible city. And so one clear example of this is my legislation on reallowing duplexes. We know that in the R2 zone, which is most of the city, duplexes have been allowed historically. You can walk around and you'll see houses that look perfectly ordinary, but they have two mailboxes. And yet we have a provision in the code that says they're allowed under two conditions. They're allowed if, one, they basically look like a single family house. They have to meet all the setback requirements of this, that, and the other. And two, they have to have been built before 1970. Well, that doesn't do us much good, especially in some of these neighborhoods that were mostly built after 1970. So that strikes me as a really good way to have more starter homes in the city without causing any kind of crazy disruption, right? I'm not talking about let's plop down the apartment buildings from Riva into the middle of Murray Hill. I'm saying we should allow there to be more opportunities for people to have starter homes. I think that's a really reasonable way to have stronger diversity within our city.
All right, well, let's talk about economic development. And Annapolis's economy does rely heavily on tourism and government. It's contributed to some sort of income inequality and a reputation that Annapolis is difficult to do business. And I've talked to some contractors that said they'll never spend money in this town again out of frustration with the red tape. What are your ideas to make the city more business friendly while still preserving the charm and character that the tourism is built on and relies on?
Yeah, just to what you were saying, I had a guy tell me, I do business in 39 states, and Annapolis is the single hardest place to get anything done. That was a pretty mind-blowing statement. Look, those two things are not in conflict in the ways that I want to address them. What's good for the goose is really good for the gander in this situation, because what's good for a business trying to, let's take the example of Capo Deli, right? Capo Deli trying to get themselves open. That is by itself good for the residents. If we make it easier for Capo Deli to open, it means that their prices can be cheaper. It means that we have more options. And so I think permitting reform is actually really about affordability in so many ways. If it doesn't take you 8 months to open a poke bowl shop, or God knows how long did it take Capo to get open the deli down on Main Street. I think it was like a year where there was previously a sandwich shop there already. That takes money. That whole time takes money. And so you have to build in those costs to your sandwiches. So, but to answer you in very concrete terms, look, I want to take that example of Blowfish Poke. Took them 8 months to open. In the same time, it took them 2.5 months in Rockville to open a location, literally over the same time period. So I had the opportunity. I was down at the Maryland Municipal League Conference, and I talked to the mayor of Rockville, and I told her that story, and she was overjoyed because she said, we used to be the place where it would have taken 8 months. I said, what'd you do to make a difference? 2 things. She said, first of all, you have to track everything. We have to know exactly how often and with which reviewers we are not meeting the deadlines that we set. And I'll be honest with you, I see that. I see that there are people who are more likely to miss those deadlines than others when just in my interactions with the permitting department. So that's thing one. Thing two is you make it perfectly clear that it is unacceptable to miss those deadlines. And so I think the next mayor really and next council really need to explore, how do we give some authority, whether it's to the mayor, the city manager, or the department head, whoever, to get out people who are not meeting those deadlines. If you say every permit is going to be completed, or maybe a better way to do it is 90% of permits are going to be completed within, pick a number, 30 days, then how do you make it perfectly clear that when somebody doesn't meet that, they're out? I think we really need to take that approach, and it's probably going to require some legislation from the next council. So that's thing one. But it's not just about businesses, right? Homeowners are really frustrated about this. So I can't tell you how many times I knock on somebody's door and I talk about this, and they say, yeah, look at my step there. It's broken. I've been trying to get a permit to fix that for God only knows how long, right? The same problem that Capo Deli has, the guy down the street who's trying to replace his fence has. So I don't think those two things are in conflict in this case. And again, to go back to my work and my day job, we're all about making things faster. We're all about making things more efficient. I spend a lot of time on permitting. So my colleagues actually are much more experts on it than I am, but we spend a lot of time on addressing that all over the country. So I come in with the mindset and with the eye of already having some ideas on how to address it. Because frankly, look, everybody has said, you can go back, I'm sure you've seen it, John, to the days of the Cohen administration, probably the Moyer administrations. Everybody said, I'm going to fix permitting. And very, very few people have really made a dent in it. I think I actually have the expertise to do it. And I think the next mayor is going to make it a huge priority.
All right, I'm also sliding into transportation and traffic. Congestion, parking shortages, especially during tourist season, and also special events are perennial problems in Annapolis. Public transit is limited. Residents often complain about the difficulty in getting around. What are your plans to improve mobility in the city? I guess we need to address also the parking garage issues with the apps, and which has been, that's a horse that's been beaten, and I'm not sure what the solution is there, but I'd like to hear what you have to think about transportation and traffic here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Where to start? Gosh, I think you've got to break this up into a lot of different problems, not to say that they don't have intersections. But let's take the issue of public transportation to start. Here's a really simple change we need to do. The buses, you should be able to pay with a credit card. You can, right now, if you get on a bus and you're somebody like me, right? You're a 28-year-old. Let me tell you, my neighbor, who I used to live next door to, he's a young professional, pretty similar guy to me, wanted to take the bus to work one day because it was raining. He normally takes a scooter, and got on there, realized you either had to already have a bus pass or have exact change. He's a young guy. He didn't have any cash on him. And so the bus driver was like, all right, well, you can take it, but you're just not going to pay us. So let's put a credit card reader in all of our buses. That should be an easy step. That would give us significantly more ridership, and it would let us capture more of the funds from the ridership. Because now he doesn't want to ride the bus because he's like, I'm not going to pay, and I feel bad about that. So that's an easy thing. In general, I think our metric on public transportation needs to be increasing ridership. And so there are folks who say that the best way to do that is to decrease or eliminate the fees rather, for buses. I'm totally open to that idea, but the research that I've seen shows that that is not the most effective way to increase ridership. That if you really want to increase ridership, what you need to do is make public transit come more frequently and more reliably. So I think that is the solution in so many ways. And then also some of those little things I was saying, like user experience, right? Another thing is the bus stops should have maps up on them, because if you don't, I remember a few years ago, I hadn't taken the bus before in Annapolis, and I was walking downtown, and a bus drove right by me right as I was walking by the bus stop. And I didn't know where that bus was going. If there had been a map there, I could have seen, oh, this one's headed to downtown. I'll just hop on. Again, I would have had to find a way to pay. But so it's a couple different things to improve that ridership number. It's user experience, so the being able to tap your credit card, having some maps, that kind of thing. It's increasing frequency, and it's increasing the reliability, making sure that people have a way of knowing that when the bus is actually going to show up. So I think those three things would do a lot to improve the ridership of our transit system.
Garage?
I knew you were going to go for parking. So parking's another one we got to break up into three. You want to talk about the garage, because I know you're not in Ward 1, Joe, but I actually think a bigger problem with parking is our residential enforcement. And when you and I talked months ago when I first got on the council, I think you asked me something about what the biggest failure of the current administration is. And I've come to think that it is actually the agreement with premium parking for the garage. The garage itself got built great, but the running of it, and in particular the running of the residential parking, has been really a disaster in so many ways. It's one of the number one things I hear about from residents. So I think on the residential side, it's become perfectly clear to me that the operator is just not meeting the requirements that they have in the contract, right? The contract that the city has with AMRP, with the consortium who built the garage, says that the operator that they hire will do enforcement every number of hours in the morning and every number of hours in the afternoon and evening. It just doesn't happen. No two ways about it. You can talk to residents. You can see the cars that are parked illegally for days on end. It just doesn't happen. And so it's so clear to me that if those requirements are not being met, the hammer needs to come down. And I believe the city's having a meeting in a couple of days about the hammer coming down. It is the official position of Annapolis, last I checked, that those requirements are not being met. And so they're in negotiations, but it's very slow. And I find it very, very frustrating. I'm talking to the administration constantly about how to speed that up, how to be more aggressive. And I'm coming around to the idea that we just need to fire the operator. So that's on residential. On the garages, I really like what we've done with the other three garages, with Knighton, Park Place, and Gotts. They're not perfect. We could make it easier to talk to a human being if you have some trouble. We could also make it more seamless for you to use your 2-hour code in those. But they're pretty darn close to perfect. All you have to do is the very first time you give them your license plate number, your phone number, and your credit card number. And then every time after that, you simply drive in and drive out and get charged automatically. That's what parking should be. And that's what we need to get home and garage to be. We're working on that on a couple different fronts. First is that all credit to Alderwoman O'Neill on this. He came up with a very clever way to slightly change the fine structure. So if somebody overstays in the garage, it used to be, and I believe in terms of actual on the ground still is, that you'd get a $50 fine. We've changed that now in code to be, you get a $25 fine plus whatever you would have paid for how long you stayed. And that's a really clever change, because technically it's not changing the total fine, or maybe it's just a smidgen increasing it just by a penny. But what it's doing is moving them to a system where you're paying at the end rather than at the beginning. you're not having to guess how long you're there for. So if you go for 2 hours, if you pay for 2 hours, but you actually stay for 3 hours, premium now has to be able to know that you stayed for 3 hours and charge you based on that. And so we're moving them in that direction of a post-paid system. The other thing we're doing is sharing with them the data from the other three garages to show that there's not a revenue impact to switching to the post-paid system. In fact, yeah, you get fewer fines because don't have people overstaying, but people are more likely to come to the garage. More people want to come downtown because they know it's an easier system. So bottom line on the garages is we're very close to perfect with the three the city directly controls. And we are working very, very hard to get Hillman to be more like those.
Fantastic. Education and youth programs, and the city government doesn't control the schools, which is sort of under the pseudo purvey of the county. But our leaders do have an impact on education and youth in Annapolis, and we do have plenty of them here. How do you support educational opportunities and youth programs here in Annapolis City?
Well, first of all, I got to tout, I'm really proud to have gotten the endorsement of the Anne Arundel County Teachers Union. I had a friend of mine she's actually a teacher in Montgomery County, but she was part of the same NSCA union, and she was out knocking doors with me on Saturday. Because I think they understand that there are so many ways that student success is determined before you get into the classroom. Look, I grew up walking to school, and I was really fortunate to be able to do that. But I think in so many ways it set me up for success, because when you're a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old guy, you want to get a little bit of energy out in the morning. I think it made me more successful in school that I was walking to class. And I know plenty of students, plenty of parents, I guess I should say, who don't let their kids walk even from President's Hill, where I live, down to the middle school because they're worried about being able to safely cross the streets. So that's a really clear example where the city has an opportunity to support our students by just making it easier to cross the street, whether that's with a crossing guard, whether it's with painting a crosswalk. What we're trying to do in that example with President's Hill is just get up a sign that shows either the little walking man or the hand, so that then parents can say to kids, don't be guessing about the green light and the red light here and this, that, and the other. Just if there's a walking man, you can safely walk, and if there's not, you can't. That's a really straightforward solution. But I tell you what, talk about things being slow. It's not just permitting. What's even worse in so many ways is procurement. That's not as visible of a function of city government, but it is something that people unknowingly get very frustrated about because it slows down the city's ability to get anything done. It should not take us a year to get a crosswalk signal put in. And yet it does, because we have to go through these ridiculous hoops where we'll have to have something out for bid for so long. We'll have to have a period of review. We go through all these different checklists. And, I'm getting really in the weeds here, but it goes back to Spiro Agnew in so many ways. The former governor of Maryland, who was corrupt on some different ways related to procurement. Basically, he was giving out contracts to his buddies. And so Maryland has created this morass of procurement requirements, mostly at the state level, and then that's trickled down to the counties and cities. So a lot of what I do in my day job is about procurement reform. I've written parts of Maryland State Procurement Code. I tried to make it simpler in some ways. And Alderman Schandelmeyer and I took a whack at starting to redo the city's procurement code. And then we got a new director of central services who oversees that department. And he asked us to give him a couple months to get settled into the role. And then we would work with him on it. So getting a little bit off of the topic of schools directly, but I do think this is a really important issue, procurement, that impacts how we can improve our city. Because look, if we want to get more done with less, and we're going to have to do that, we need to have a better process for figuring out what the more is and what the less is. And so it's really straightforward to me that just working through that code, those code requirements will make a big difference in being able to support our neighborhoods. So that was a long-winded answer. But the other thing I'd just point to is we did make a point of supporting after-school programs this year in the budget. But I think there's probably some more we can do on that, because that is a city function. But you've got to find a way to find the money for it. And when other folks are talking about austerity and talking about outsourcing things to the county, I think that's going to make it a lot harder for the city to be able to do those programs.
Sure. I'll tell you, city residents do expect open and ethical government. And as stated in the ethics guidelines, they are holding the public trust requires maintaining high ethical standards. And that was a quote. How are you going to promote transparency and accountability at City Hall if reelected?
I'm so glad you asked me that. And I want to read you a quote from my website.
Okay, great. So I quote and then you quote, right? Okay, fine. I see how this is going to work.
So this is from a friend of mine over on Southgate Avenue. And I say he's a friend. He is a friend, but he became a friend because of work I did on the city council. He said, I have truly never seen such transparency in government on every single matter before the city council. Just check Harry's weekly newsletter. So I think that says volumes. It's one person, but I really pride myself on being more transparent than I've ever seen from any other representatives in the city. What I do is every 2 weeks, I send out a newsletter that says every piece of legislation and my thoughts on it. And sometimes I'll say, no, I'm absolutely opposed to this. Other times I say, I'm kind of leaning in support of this, but I really want to hear from you. And that collaborative process allows for much more transparent government, but I also think much more ethical government. Look, if there was ever anything I was doing that was not on the up and up, people would see it. People would see it because, frankly, I don't have a whole lot of filter in those newsletters. It's right at my dining room table, typically in my pajamas. And it's a very candid look at how I think about city government.
Fantastic. My next question is talking about the past administration's successes and failures. And there's been some criticism and there's been some, cheering for the administration. You've already said that you believe that the past administration's failure was probably that 30-year agreement that went in there. But let's talk about what do you think some of the outgoing administration has really done right over the last 4 years, considering that the mayor and most of the council will be leaving this year?
A really clear win has been public water access. I think that's something that the mayor ran on. What was I looking at the other day? Something from his 2017 campaign, and it was really obvious how much he was talking about public water access as part of that. It is really unfair how much of Annapolis is private waterfront that nobody can access. And it's not just about, I think in that mayoral campaign, you heard a lot of rhetoric about, the folks in Ward 6 should be able to come and access the waterfront. But to me, it's not even about that. It's really just about the folks who live in Ward 1 saying, I don't live on the end of Thompson Street on the waterfront side, but I like to come down and have my coffee at that street end park. So we have created the end of Thompson Street as a street end park. And I think that's going to lead to significant investment there. And, the beautiful thing, and this goes to my next point about that public water access, is so much of those improvements have been done via state and federal grants, especially state grants, the DNR Waterways Fund. A lot of that, if you go in and look at the budget, is we're spending either very little or none at all city money to, say, put in the new dock at Lafayette Park. That's really exciting. And I think you absolutely have got to hand it to the mayor on his ability to bring in grant money. It is really, really impressive how much he can sell a vision. I think we're going to see that somewhat restricted over the next couple of years. But at the same time, I'll tell you, he was saying to me the other day about having some folks from the current administration in and how excited they were about his vision for something. So it is bipartisan to an extent, but that ability to get additional investment in the city, whether it's from the county, whether it's from the state, whether it's from the feds, has been really impressive, both from the mayor at the top, but also from a lot of the department directors. And I think, I hope we'll be able to see that, but to the extent that we're not going to see it, I think it really speaks to the opportunity we have here to rebalance us towards common sense maintenance. That's what I said in the city budget we needed to do. We've got a bunch of exciting projects in the works, we're completed. And so now we're going to focus on how do we implement those as well as we possibly can.
There you go. Well, you talked about the budget a couple times throughout here. In Annapolis, we have to do more with less. That's another phrase that you've used a little bit there, because we have so much state, federal, and county resources in the city that don't pay taxes. Keeping taxes reasonable is a lot of pressure. In the recent mayoral debate, the candidates were asked how they'd account for financial gaps if federal funding to the city were cut. As a council member, what would be your budget priorities?
Well, I would stick with the one I outlined last year of I think we really do need to put more into the less sexy maintenance, the sewers and streets and sidewalks, and a little bit less into the shiny new things. I think the person who I think should be the next mayor, Jared, has said something very similar. I know he's excited to redo how we fund sidewalk maintenance. So that would continue to be one that you've seen from me before. And we were really successful this past year in doubling the amount of funding for sidewalk maintenance by cutting the fat from a couple capital projects. So that's one. But look, let's talk about taxes. I hear from folks regularly that they are worried about property taxes, that they feel that burden on them. And I totally get it. I think that we need to be looking at how to lower the property tax burden. What I don't think the way we should do that, in my opinion, is not that we should offer a credit to only people whose home value drives the most. I think that's a really silly solution because, as we've seen in Anne Arundel County and in other places, that actually leads to the property tax rate going up. And so I'm not a big fan of that. So we should be looking, my goal is how do we lower the property tax rate? I think we do that with three clear solutions. In the short term, you made a really good point, John. A lot of our issue is because we have land that is not paying any property taxes. In fact, 78% of the city by land area pays less in property taxes than it costs to maintain its infrastructure. It's overwhelmingly not Ward 1, but to the extent it is Ward 1, it's because we have county and state and nonprofit properties that aren't paying any taxes. So I've already started working with our budget director on reevaluating all those areas that aren't paying any taxes and seeing if we can either get or adjust the pilots, their payment in lieu of taxes. So, for instance, with the state, I think we get about $800,000 from them each year. We should just compare that to other cities, right? Baltimore has a lot of state properties. Hagerstown, I believe, has some significant state properties. There are other cities we can look at and see, are we getting a good deal or are we not here? My guess is probably not. Same thing with the county. The county does not pay us a pilot, and yet they have a ton of land in some of the most valuable parts of the state. And then similarly with some of the nonprofit institutions, we should be evaluating that. So that's action one. Action two is, I talked about this a little bit before, but we need to reform our procurement system. Huge amounts of the city budget do go out in the form of contracts. Yeah, on balance, a majority of the city budget is salaries and benefits, but a lot of it is contracts for things like sidewalk repair, for things like sewer repair. We spend let's see, what was it? $4 million, I think, last year on street repair, which arguably is not enough. But if you can have a better procurement structure so that you can get 20% more street repair for 10% less cost there, then you can look at that's a $400,000 saving, $400,000 here, $400,000 there. That starts to add up just because you're improving the way that you buy things and you're getting more competition. It sounds almost like waving a magic wand, but trust me, I've seen it work in real life. In my day job, we have an example where something that Anne Arundel County pays about $6,000 for, Montgomery County pays $100,000 for. That's crazy. That is an insane disparity. And I'm sure we can come up with examples like that between the city of Annapolis and other cities, where if we simply improve our procurement policies, we could save a lot of money and pass that savings on to residents in the form of lower property taxes. The third thing is that we need to have smarter land use. And I talked about this a little bit before as well, but when I talk about that 78% of the city by land area, again, it's not Ward 1. Prince George Street is one of the best performing areas and certainly in the city, maybe even in the county, by that metric of revenue to expenses, not only because, this is a desirable place to live and those are relatively expensive houses, but more importantly, because we don't have to spend as much for every one of those units on, say, sewer, right? Because they're closer together. You don't have to run as much sewer pipe. So that's a really exciting opportunity, I think, to strengthen the city's property tax base so we can lower the city's property tax rates. That is, I think, the fundamental question to me. If we're really going to look in the long term about providing property tax relief, and it's not just us, cities all over the country are looking at this. We've got to have smarter land use. We've got to have more fiscally responsible land use. We know that that's a possibility here in Annapolis. We know that Maryland pioneered so much of that. We know the governor talks about it. We know the Secretary of Housing talks about it. So it's a way to make Annapolis more affordable in just about every way you can conceptualize that, and to improve the health of the city's budget.
Fantastic. Well, I think I know the answer to this next topic here, but voters feel often disconnected from their officials. How do you plan to engage the public and stay accountable to your residents between elections?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really get that sentiment, to be totally honest with you. At least, I mean, maybe it's kind of a selection bias, because if I'm talking to somebody, then of course, they don't feel disconnected from me because I'm talking to them already. But look, I had somebody who said to me, he said, in my whole long life, John was, probably a senior, said, in my whole long life, I've never had a politician come knock on my door. Now you've done it twice. And so one answer, besides, the obvious is the newsletter. I could go on and on about my newsletter. I'm very proud of it. Everybody can sign up at harrymhuntley.com or see it at harrymhuntley.com/news. But I want to keep door knocking, even after the election. I find that it's a phenomenal way to stay connected to people. And it's truly one of my favorite things I do when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling like, another one of my opponents is attacking me over something ridiculous. I go out and I door knock, because my favorite thing about this job is talking to people in person. My least favorite thing about the job is talking to people behind a screen.
Fair. I want to switch into some ward priorities here. Each of Annapolis's 8 wards has their own unique concerns and needs. In your ward, Ward 1, what do you believe is the single most pressing issue facing the community, and how are you looking to address that?
Well, if it was the single most pressing issue, I promise you I would have already addressed it. So it's going to be hard for me not to repeat myself here. But I'll give you a top 3. It is parking, it is infrastructure, it is taxes. And overwhelmingly, it is this feeling of, I pay a lot in taxes and I want to see the benefit from it. That's what people tell me. It's not this idea of, boy, let's tear down city government because I'm frustrated with my tax bill. I think that's, a vocal minority that we've got a lot of other people in this race running on. People want to see results. People know this is an amazing place to live, and they just want to know that they're getting something for their money. They want the sidewalks to not be broken. They want the parking system to be easy. And yeah, we should, like I said earlier, be looking at how we can reduce that property tax burden. But in general, I think the sentiment is, I pay a lot in property taxes, and I just want to be able to see what I'm getting for that. I want my sidewalks fixed. I want my parking easy. I want my quality of life to be really high. I want that customer service focus that city government really needs a little bit more of.
All right. Well, as a council member, you're going to represent, obviously, Ward 1's interest, but you also need to make decisions for the overall good of the city. How are you going to balance your needs of your ward versus the needs of Annapolis as a whole?
Oh, that's a tough question, John, because Ward 1 is unique. We are the cultural and economic powerhouse of the city. So, look, there's this thing, people talk about councilmanic or aldermanic courtesy of, if something affects your ward, then everybody kind of votes based on your thoughts for it. And I really don't subscribe to that, because I recognize that everybody is going to have opinions about my ward. And so I'm going to have opinions about theirs. So part of my answer, I guess, is that I do not just defer to the other members of the council on what's best for their wards. I will consider it myself, because I recognize that they all rightfully want to consider what's going on in my ward and have opinions on that. But I think, again, it's something about what's good for the goose. It's what's good for the gander. What's good for Ward 1, as that 22% of the city that is paying more in taxes than it costs to maintain its infrastructure, that is overwhelmingly in Ward 1, right? That is, Ward 1 is probably the only ward that on net pays more in property taxes than it costs to maintain its infrastructure. I think 2 and 8 are about even, but we're sort of the breadbasket for everybody. So I think we need to have that pride, and the Ward 1 representative needs to take on a real leadership role. The Ward 1 representative on the city council should be the chair of the finance committee because we're the breadbasket of the city. And so I think when I look around at the rest of the field, I feel pretty confident that the next mayor is not going to have them be the chair of the finance committee for reasons I could get into. And so I want to have that opportunity to say, I'm going to stick in this role. I'm going to represent us. I'm going to champion us. And I'm going to bring home the bacon because you know what? We're the South. We're producing the bacon.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you, we're going to start to wrap it up here. There are about 14,000 people that are listening to this, and whoever listens at Eye on Annapolis or the socials. Here is your chance, and it's open mic night. Please don't sing. I've told everybody else the same thing because I don't think any of you guys sing really well. Pitch them. Why do we need to vote for Harry Huntley for Ward 1 Alderman?
Well, John, I'll tell you, my karaoke song should have been a cowboy, but I won't sing it. Look, you're going to hear a lot of visions about all of the things that are wrong with our city. You're going to hear a lot of things about what we need to change. And I recognize that there are opportunities for change. But I want to put forward a positive vision about a city that our kids and our grandkids can love as much as we do. How do we build that city is the mission that I'm running on. And I think it takes neighbors working together, that aspect of building up the community and getting your hands dirty and rolling up your sleeves. It takes a city government that's willing to do more with less. But it really starts with having a representative who answers with, let's make it happen. It starts with somebody who has the energy and the expertise and the positivity to build that better future for our kids. So what excites me is the opportunity to strengthen our vibrant communities, to protect our people, and to optimize government. When we look at what's going to happen after this administration, I think within the mayoral race, we see really 3 clear options. We can kind of stay on the same course. We could tear it all down, right? That's what we're hearing from a lot of folks is, I'm so frustrated. I'm just going to outsource everything to the county. City government isn't working. Let's get rid of it. Let's not even have a mayor is what some candidates are proposing. And then we have this third vision that says city government in some ways isn't working for people. They're not seeing that benefit for their hard-earned tax dollars, but we can make it work. We can make city government be a force for good so that when you call, you get the same experience that you have when you walk into a hardware store, maybe a particular hardware store, and you have representatives who will truly make it happen for you, who will truly build up those communities in a way that allows us to be proud of, that creates a brighter, more vibrant, more prosperous future for everybody. When people are going into the ballot box, I want them to think about, am I going to vote for hope or for fear? And I think that when they look at it through that lens, they're going to pick Harry.